Our reading, a poem by Rich Orloff. It's called The Big Ask. To God, to all, to my ancestors, to anyone who will listen, I ask for this. Bless me with a peace that's deeper than happiness, that makes room for profound sorrow, that accepts pain and loss, that's not dependent on good news. Bless me with a peace that comforts me when I feel anguish, that steadies me when I feel uncertain, that expands me when I think small, and that finds a way through my fiercest resistance. Bless me with a peace that stretches beyond my horizons, that heals even if I can't explain why, that offers delight at an everyday gift that allows me to see blessings, like seeing someone's dog this week. Bless me with a peace that is a refuge from torment, that is an oasis from yearning, that is a sanctuary from trauma, that transcends all else, but never denies all else. Bless me with a peace that renews my gratitude for life, and that I can access every time I let it in. It was when they held hands. We were seated on the floor at the Masjid al-Wadud, Imam Kevin Dawood Amin's mosque on Bloomfield Avenue. We were packed into a small room in the back, waiting for the service to begin. This was the women's space, the space in a mosque where the women set the norms for propriety, a space that doesn't allow for the gender expansiveness of my understanding, but a space that holds that community well. The women there decide how they will be with one another. The Muslim women were intrigued that there were so many visitors who had come wearing pink hearts on our shirts. We explained that we were there from the Montclair Interfaith Clergy Association, that we had visited the synagogues the week before, that we represented many congregations from all around town, and that there were among us many clergy, in fact, 3 rabbis there. A rabbi was seated next to our Muslim host, and I am not sharing their names because these times are charged, and I do not want to assume that it is my right to tell their story. They reached out, however, to share their names with one another and to shake hands, and as they learned who they each were, who they each represented, they kept their hands together, encircling for longer than a time of customary greeting. They looked into one another's eyes, and there was more in that moment and in that room than I can describe with words, but those of us that were there, we feel it and carry that feeling and know it as a gift. Because in that moment, they were shelter for one another, protecting the delicate intricacy of one another's being. They were shelter for one another amidst a hell of a storm. We are witness. We are witness to terror and to the terror of war. We are witness to a tragedy that has been unfolding for centuries and a tragedy that is only mounting with the terrible hell of these days. We are witness to the death of children, many children. There is little we could bear witness to that could scar a people more and leave more of a soul-deep injury for our global world. In my study of evil, I learned that the most universally understood evil is the murder of a child, because in a child's death, there is the loss of a life and the loss of incredible potential, the loss of some 100 unlived years. We are witness to this horror, but we are not merely watching a drama unfold. It has come home. In other parts of the country, we are having theoretical arguments about who is right and who is wrong. Here, we feel the war intimately. We are a diaspora state, a state that is home to the global diaspora. This New Jersey, where we live, breathe, and find community, is home to the largest population of Israeli citizens. And our neighbor town in Patterson is home to the largest population of Palestinians. They are all our friends, our loved ones. They have taken shelter here, and they are now again at risk. This war has come home, and we in northern New Jersey are a people that carry the scars of the attacks of 9/11. We lost loved ones when those towers collapsed. We still visit the monuments. I remember being here in this town on the anniversary of 9/11 and visiting the monument here in this town with people from this community who were all mourning dear ones. And just last April, we gathered in Montclair at Temple Ner Tamid after a firebomb lobbed in an anti-Semitic attack shook their synagogue. This war is not theoretical here. It is unfolding among us. And not just in the political actions that I see on our town's main thoroughfare on Bloomfield Avenue, where neighbors wave opposing flags, Israeli and Palestinian claiming a side of the street like partisans preparing for battle. This war is not only confined to our political actions, it lives in our assumptions about our neighbors, in our relationships with one another, with family, with friends, with congregants, and deeper still within our own souls. Many of us feel the war has taken root between those parts of ourselves that do not cohere. Those parts of our souls that love peace and those parts that seek justice. Those parts that remember past genocides and those parts that see a tragic loss unfolding. Shelter from this storm for us, it's not an abstract plea, but an embodied need for each and every one. And by shelter, I do not mean running away or hiding. We do not have that freedom. Our liberty as Unitarian Universalists is contingent on our commitment to be in community, in relationship with one another, a wider and wider circle of one another. So by shelter, I mean responding like the rabbi and the Muslim host who, amidst the hell of this storm, clasped hands and held and held and held and looked into each other's eyes directly and profoundly, resisting the ever-present screed that they too must reject their kinship. Veterans know perhaps more than any other that while shelter is a right, a human right, according to the United Nations, it is not a given. The battlefield is a place without shelter, and releasing the pain of the battlefield is no easy task, not 1 or even 20 years after the fighting has ceased, not 1 or even 20,000 miles from the bombs that are falling. War follows us. Bless me with a peace that transcends but does not deny, says our poet, Rich Orloff. A shelter that transcends but does not deny, a shelter that allows for peace in a time of war. I'm finding a profound lesson beckoning me from our time of sheltering in place. Do you remember when the authorities prescribed shelter in place to limit the spread of the pandemic? I remember the restriction I felt on my freedom, but I also remember the blessing of having shelter at hand, a home that I could return to, warm and safe? Who were the populations that we focused on soon after the shelter-in-place prescription? Who were the populations that we knew faced the greatest risk? There were, of course, the essential workers that had to venture out, but they did have a relative shelter to return to. The most at-risk population were the people who were houseless, who did not have access to any real shelter of any kind. And the other most at-risk population were people for whom shelter was a place of danger, people who faced violence at home. Weren't those the people we knew couldn't really shelter in place? Those who were most at risk? Now take those truths and map them on to the current war unfolding in Israel and Gaza. Take those truths and map them onto the story of the Israeli people, the Jewish people, and the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people, a houseless people, a people without the shelter of a land, a home, a people who face domestic oppressive violence in the place that they would call their home. And that and is essential. And take those truths and map them onto the Israeli people, the Jewish people, a people who face domestic violence in the form of terror and a constant threat from near neighbors, an existential threat, a threat that has always denied their humanity. Domestic violence and houselessness, no shelter from the storm, unresolved ancestral hatred stoked for political power and gain. Breathe with me. I am taking us down a very rough path today because I am trying to live the call of a preacher that makes sense of the senseless and speaks meaning into the void. I am taking us down this rough path because we have work to do. And I am taking us down this path today because I am chastened by the learning in the book of Ecclesiastes that reminds us of the eternal promise in this profound phrase. The sun also rises, and the sun goeth down. The sun rises and the sun goes down, and I am taking us down this path today because it is too easy to look at the horror, evil, and tragedy that is unfolding and be confused and just stop there and stall there and ache there without the courage that knows the sun will also rise if we are steady and honest and kind. And I am taking us down this path today because we are not the only ones who will in our lifetime see a hell on earth and pray for the sun to rise anon. And I am taking us down this path because this path leads to the teacher Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor who lived through a loss interminable, who saw the sun go down on everything and then rise again. This teacher speaks to us of our calling to wade out of what many are saying is an interminable complexity. Elie Wiesel says, we must make accessible and familiar things that are not. Nothing is meant to remain complicated forever. The truth is not somewhere up in the heavens, unchanging among the angels, but here down below. It is up to us, Elie Wiesel says, to interpret it and reinterpret it anew each day, not as some intellectual exercise, but as shelter from the storm. I grow skeptical and weary whenever I witness the pouring of our human community into two camps, us versus them. I grow skeptical and weary when the struggle is reduced in news reports and in protests and in conversations with dear ones too. You must take a side and stand your ground. I grow skeptical and weary because there is always someone profiting from our contentiousness, our battle. And there is often something hidden by our fixation with one true and noble cause. It was Pradeep Malde, an unlikely purveyor, who gave me what has come to be my most preciously held philosophy. Pradeep Malde was my professor of photography, an artist who could catch subtleties of light on film that would awe the most studied onlooker. Pradeep took us one day to the edge of a mountain, and there, looking out into the vast sculpted valley, said, as casually as the Buddha, sometimes the actual picture, the one that you need to take, is behind you. And when you are most certain that you are turned the right way, framing the right frame, perhaps then, especially as an artist, you must commit yourself to turning around and seeing everything that you are missing. There is likely something behind you that is more compelling and hidden and will stay hidden until you release your expectation. We are staring ahead at a war between Israel and Hamas, between those with a Jewish and those with a Muslim identity. What behind us are we missing? In his book, Rashi, An Exploration of a Jewish Sage from the Middle Ages, the peace activist and Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel paints the picture of Rashi and his Jewish kindred's 11th century French existence. He explains it this way. They lived, he says, at the whim or self-interest of the church authorities and political sovereigns. When they were needed, he says, they were left in peace. Afterward, they were disposed of, unprotected, not even tolerated. The same could be said of the Christian empire's treatment of Muslims. When Pope Urban II sent crusaders south to conquer the Holy Land, speaking of the Holy Land, when Pope Urban II sent crusaders south to conquer the Holy Land, they recorded the shedding of the blood of both Jews and Muslims as sanctified, as a holy offering. Since Christian supremacy was wedded to empire, nations have refused to acknowledge the humanity of their Muslim and Jewish kindred. Since Christian supremacy was wedded to empire, our Muslim and Jewish kindred have had to fight to survive. And I am not only talking about Europe, but America. It was only 80 years ago when Nazi sympathizers gathered up on Rifle Camp Road here in New Jersey, meant to indoctrinate our New Jersey youth to the Nazi cause. And when boats of Jewish souls were rejected sanctuary from our shores, when they were sent back to imminent Nazi-orchestrated murder. And it was only 10 years ago when we watched boats of Syrian refugees refused harbor again and again. And it was only 7 years ago when Executive Order 13769 banned travel for people of 7 majority Muslim countries for 90 days, suspended refugee resettlement for 120 days, and banned Syrian refugees indefinitely. The Muslim and the Jewish people have faced a Christian supremacy, a global dominance, and a Christian indifference that offers no shelter to the infidel, no sanctuary to the Semonite, for as long as Christianity has been a dominating power. What is in front of us is a war between two peoples. What is behind us is an oppression visited upon our global world by a power that would rather we not turn around to see the truth of its complicity, nor the way that it profits from our reluctance to bear full witness. I do not say this to offer us a new side to blame. And I do not say this to paint anyone, Israeli or Palestinian, as a victim. There are none wholly innocent save the children, not in this crisis. I say this to remind us that the truth is wider than our news shows are willing or capable to witness. But we must. We must. And I say this to remind myself before I speak out against one or the other, that I here in this nation have been and will be given shelter again and again just by virtue of my identity and by the privilege of my congregation's identity, a shelter that both Muslim and Jewish congregations and Muslim and Jewish people will be denied. So I best be careful to use both of those privileges righteously. My Jewish mother baptized me in the same Catholic church that refused to marry her to my Catholic father because she wanted to save her child from the persecution that she had endured. My God, if that is not a lesson of our true proximity to this hate. I am protected by virtue of her sacrifice and her suffering. May I not use my privilege as an individual or as a Unitarian Universalist to allow my given shelter to forsake any other. May my work as a person of faith be to offer the shelter that those who do not share my identity have been for centuries denied. May I sacrifice my safety to bring our Muslim and Jewish kindred together, not to use it to force them further apart. Amen. I have closing words for us that do not come from words I have written. The first is from the Holy Quran, and the second is from the Jewish Midrash. From the Holy Quran: should anyone confront you with violence, you should try and repel it with peacefulness, whereby the one who is your enemy will become your friend. And from the Jewish Midrash: the person who turns an enemy into a friend has accomplished the work of God. May it be so. A reading, a poem by Rich Orloff. It's called The Big Ask. To God, to all, to my ancestors, to anyone who will listen, I ask for this. Bless me with a peace that's deeper than happiness, that makes room for profound sorrow, that accepts pain and loss, that's not dependent on good news. Bless me with a peace that comforts me when I feel anguish, that steadies me when I feel uncertain, that expands me when I think small, and that finds a way through my fiercest resistance. Bless me with a peace that stretches beyond my horizons, that heals even if I can't explain why, that offers delight at an everyday gift that allows me to see blessings, like seeing someone's dog this week. Bless me with a peace that is a refuge from torment, that is an oasis from yearning, that is a sanctuary from trauma, that transcends all else, but never denies all else. Bless me with a peace that renews my gratitude for life, and that I can access every time I let it in.